This video, we're going to go through medallions, creating medallions in Fusion 360. It's an Autodesk product. It's in the heavy CAD realm, but it's actually perfect for this sort of work. So Origin, handheld CNC, is designed for a huge range of situations, one of which is hardwood flooring. You see here from this image, one of our customers, Mark Schaller, did this massive, I believe it's 18 feet long, musical score inlaid into a floor, all live on site with Origin. It was actually done with a program called Adobe Illustrator, but you get the idea of the type of things we can do. So inlays, medallions, as we'll cover in this video, patching and repairing damaged panels, and then also hardware installation, be it vents, plugs, cable through holes, you name it. Origin can help out with precision and accurate alignment and nesting of pockets and details in a very small, compact on-site package. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about medallions. These are all 3D renderings, but we'll have images of the examples of medallions for you to look at as well. So these are all created in 3D using Fusion 360. I believe it's Jake and Noah who've been working on these. But you can create the positive elements with the workstation in, like, say, 1/4 inch or less even stock. So set it up in the workstation using the shelf, cut the positive, and then cut the pocket on site. And it doesn't have to be round, as is common with most medallions, using traditional routers and templates and hole cutting jigs. We can cut whatever shape we want on site using Origin, and it's digital precision. So even things like coming back and removing another 1/1000th of an inch, so we don't need templates. We get the precision on the job site. That's very uncommon for other traditional workflows. Then there's the adaptability. We can change the fit with offsets, so we can take another 1/1000th of an inch off if we're unsatisfied with the friction fit or the glue gap we're looking for. And there's often scenarios for various hardware where we can design everything on tool on the site, and we don't need to even bring a computer into the equation. So for this demonstration, we are going to design on a computer, and then we'll show the results of cutting it live. The process is designing a computer, export all the parts. Then we go through, we cut the positive parts on the workstation itself if there's a range of material, stock colors and things, you'll bring in the separate panels, cut all the components you want, and then cut the pocket in the floor, test fit it, adjust the offsets to get the perfect fit you're looking for, and then glue everything up, install, sand, and finish. So here's a little look at the type of thing we're going to see. This demonstration or diagram here is a Fusion 360 sort of CAD representation. It's probably for this type of work the most suitable, but there's plenty of people that do the same thing in Illustrator and Affinity Designer. So they're, instead of being 3D CAD apps, they are 2D vector editing apps. So if you're creating sort of organic shapes, they can be the go-to. A lot of people use them in the signage, web development, those types of industries. And then if ever you're overwhelmed, if what I'm describing here is too much to deal with, if you can draft it up on a napkin, we offer the service called Shaper Assist. So you can take it in whatever format you get to. You might do a drawing, a painting, a description of what you want, or you might get some way through the CAD process and stall out. You can always send that into Shaper Assist, and they'll quote you what it will cost to produce the final cuttable project. So that will be shared as a ShaperHub project. So ShaperHub is so I'm at here, hub.shapertools.com, and we're looking at, these are what customers have shared up on ShaperHub. So we've got premium projects, a whole range of various hardware installs, cutter holders, you name it. So the community is sharing projects. These are all free and can be instantly copied to Origin. We've actually uploaded a few. There's a section here. You can sort by category and type in flooring. So here's an example of one Jake did, another one. So there's a lot of really cool stuff available already. I'm just showing you this because this is the way Assist will send you your files. So you'll have all the cut files here, the pocket, all the positives in the different materials, and the instructions for how to cut these files. So this is the type of thing you would get back if you send in a project that you wanted cut with Assist. It would be shared with you as your own private ShaperHub project. Type in assist@shapertools.com and show you how Assist works. So you just submit your design request, receive a quote, and if you agree to the quote and the turnaround time, this is where you submit it, by the way, we'll send you back the project. So that can span from logos, that sort of thing, even just your signature, if you want to add that to the bottom of your projects, and hardware installations, all the way through to full-on 3D designs. And the people working on Assist are very familiar with Origin workflows, so they'll help you navigate some of the considerations, work holding, cutter selection, that sort of thing. That'll guarantee you get a good outcome. Encourage you to take a look at that if you ever stall out. And of course, there's always the community. These are all the different sections. So you would go into design software and maybe click Fusion 360. Then you can ask a question here. And so long as you communicate what's going wrong, often the community will help you. And then there's regular email support to ShaperTools, support@shapertools.com. Now, what we're going to do here is, because all of these elements are repeated, so we only need to make a few of them, and then we can pattern them around, do a radial pattern. So we don't need to go and create everything from the ground up. We can create the unique elements and then duplicate them rotationally around the center here. Circular patterns. One other thing is we're going to be rounding corners. So even though we've got these points in this little star or compass inlay, you'll see here, if we were to use a 1/4 inch cutter, we'd get the corners rounded with a 1/8 inch radius. So obviously you can go to a 1/8 inch cutter. It'll take you longer to cut that element. Keep in mind, with Origin, you can change the cutters you use. So you could clear all the center of this area with, say, even like a 1/2 inch cutter, and then come through and cut the perimeter with an 1/8 inch cutter to get you the details you need. And then you can take that further and go down to a 1/16. Just keep in mind there's a trade-off for how deep you can cut. So if you were cutting with a 1/64 of an inch cutter, the depth that it would cut to would be, say, 3 times the cutter radius before it starts to get too unstable. So chances are that's not going to be a great idea. So the alternative would be maybe you just want to chisel out those corners and keep them really hard-edged. If you're happy with chiseling both the pocket and the positive element, so you see how the corners get rounded in different ways. So the inside corner is always where the material gets left. So if we were to bring these two elements together without chiseling the corner, they wouldn't fit because this material would collide with this hard point. And likewise, this hard corner would collide with this rounded corner. So the option is to just chisel those out. Here's an exaggerated example of an element that's prepared and both the inside and the outside corners are rounded so that the pocket and the interior elements all fit together with no chiseling, no post operations. You can just cut everything with Origin, tune your offsets, and you're good to go. So we'll get to Fusion and kick this whole thing off. Here's what we're presented with when we start Fusion. So I'm in a 3D view. I'm just going to turn on over here the Origin. So you can turn on by clicking on these little eyes. You can expand these. So this shows you all of the elements. So I'm looking at XY planes, lines, and the center point. This is what makes up the Origin, not ShaperTools Origin, 3D Space Origin. So this is 0, 0, 0 in X, Y, and Z. So I am going to show you here, there's up in the top right corner is how we can navigate. So we've got this is called the view cube, and this enables us to just orbit around. This is one of the ways to navigate. And it's a quick way of getting a feel for where you are in 3D space. So if I want to view from the front, just click the front. If I want to view from a 3/4 view, I highlight that corner and it'll rotate around. If I want to view from the top, click that. There's also, rotate left 90 degrees, right 90 degrees, go to the home view. There's a bunch in there to investigate. We won't get into that for this one. The other way I navigate is with the mouse. So with the scroll button, if I click it down and drag, I can pan. And then I can zoom in and out. Just a heads up, the Origin doesn't zoom as a 3D object. I'll just quickly go here and change my document settings to inches. Okay, that just means that every dimension I create is going to automatically be in inches. You can mix and match much the same way as you do on Origin, millimeters, inches, whatever dimension you want. But just for simplicity here, we'll get that into inches as the default, and then I can collapse that. Up here, I'm in design mode. So there's a bunch of other ones. If you ever end up in a strange one like simulation, this is all going to look very foreign. For all the Origin work we're going to do, make sure you're in design, and then most of it is going to be in the solid menu. So we're either going to be creating sketches, 2D drawings, or manipulating solid geometry. So there's other options, surface, sheet metals, and one more to note, tools. This is where the Shaper add-on is. So this is how we export geometry to Origin. So it's a tool. This is where Autodesk presents it. We'll get to that later though. So design mode, we're going to create a sketch. So that's the same as this button up here. First, we'll talk you through, the shortcuts at the top of this menu. Then we'll show you all the options available down in the menu itself. And then I'm going to start using things like this, the shortcut. So if I want to do an extrude, I can click here, or I can just hit on the keyboard the E button. And you'll notice beside a lot of these, there's shortcuts. So to keep things quick, we'll get into that. I'll show you what I mean by that. If I was to do an extrude, hit E, You'll see here my little screen thing is going to tell you what keys I'm pressing. Also, you'll see here the extrude options have come up, and you'll see up here the extrude button is active. So if I go cancel or escape, I can get out of that. So now I'm back to select mode. So first things first, let's create a sketch. So I can either do it with this button here under solid, create sketch, or this button here. What we're going to see here is a lot of what happens in the viewport. Fusion's going to try and tell us what it wants from us. So I've activated the sketch mode, and you'll see here my cursor, if I hold still, is now saying select a plane or face, or planar face. And you'll see down here it's kind of defaulted to whatever I'm selecting with the origin itself. So I actually want the XY plane. So now it's going to zip me around. I'm viewing from the top. So what I mean by that is all it's done is moved my little view cube, or moved my camera, so I'm looking straight down on this plane, kind of like a plan. Now you'll notice in my one, Z is up, so I'll just show you what we're doing here. So I've just gone to my profile and the preferences section, and then in the very top level under general, there's orientation Z up. So the alternative there is Y up. I believe Y up's the default, but for Origin and a lot of CNC work, Z is actually the vertical axis. So when we talk about Z and Origin, we're talking about the cutter moving up and down. So Origin rests on the XY plane, this plane that we're drawing on, and it moves, the cutter moves up and down in the blue Z vector axis, however we want to refer to that. So we are now in sketch mode on the XY plane. It's created this menu here. Once again, get familiar with this, open up if you ever don't understand what's going on. Everything in your file is contained or represented in here as a little drop down. So, the origin has all its elements, named view, top, left, right, they're all there. And then our sketches start to populate down here. So this is where we start to create our geometry that we're going to then extrude or convert into 3D geometry. So this is just 2D lines. And you'll notice down here, this is our history. So as we create more elements, they're going to accumulate down here. And we can actually, with this little bar, scrub through time to go back and edit things earlier in the design process, should we change our mind. So with this sketch active, we notice we've left solid modeling and now we've moved to sketch mode. A quick thing to check, I always do on the right-hand side. If I'm ever in sketch mode, I'll see this big green button to finish sketch mode. So these all are settings, either creating, modifying, or constraining elements in 2D. So that's what we're going to manipulate in sketch mode, and we can get right to it actually. So I am going to start by creating a circle. As we saw in the original design, it's a compass, and we have a circle here. So the default circle is based on center and then dragging. You can create 2-point circles, 3-point circles, all these other ones. But if you were to hit C, the button C on the keyboard, you would create a center-based circle. So you notice I've moved away from the orthogonal top-down view, but I can still create geometry like this. So I clicked on the center there. That's constrained my circle to the center, and now I'm dragging to enter the diameter. So I can do this by hand. This is much the same as Origin. I can define my diameter by just moving the cursor, or you'll see that little data entry point is highlighted blue. I can type in 16, and this, you'll see the cursor is telling me specify diameter of circle. You'll also notice as I'm entering this, the fact I've entered it, it locks that value. So you can see the little yellow lock symbol next to that data entry, and because I'm in a inches project, I don't need to enter, like I could do it like this, but I don't have to. The whole project is in inches, so it's going to assume inches if I just do 16. Right, so now zooming out, and then this with the scroll wheel and the center scroll button to move around to center it. We can also do fit, and we'll automatically fit to our geometry. This is where we do a lot of the view manipulation as well as the view cube. So we have a 16-inch circle. Notice I can move this diameter. So this is called a dimension. I can remove it. Doesn't matter where it is. This is just a value attached to this. I can actually also right-click on it and say toggle radius, and it's going to switch to half the diameter, which is the radius. And we can always toggle that back. I can also delete it. So see how it's highlighted blue? I've clicked on it and then hit delete. And you'll notice my geometry now goes blue. So it was black, which meant it was fully defined or fully constrained. So we are constrained to the center. That's actually this coincident constraint. I'm actually going to view it from the top down for simplicity, and I'm going to hide my origin. So you'll see here, the center of my circle is constrained to this center point, which means I can change the diameter now because I've removed that diameter value, but I can't change the position. It's locked to that. I could then go in and highlight that constraint and delete it. So I hit the delete key. Now what we have is a circle that can be moved anywhere. Now I can take that circle and set up those constraints again by hand. So I can go, I want to make that center point coincident to the center of my world. And then I want to make my dimensions. So the D is under Create, Dimension, and then I just highlight the object I'm dimensioning, and you'll see it's now defining a dimension. I click where I want it to be drawn, and then I enter 16. So we're back where we started. We have a 16-inch circle, and it's constrained at the center. So it's rendering as a black line. Everything is as we wish. I hit Escape to get myself out of that dimension mode. And now there's one more thing we're going to add here. This curve is producing what we call a profile. Just keep that idea of a profile in mind. We're going to move on to creating a line. So that would either be under the Create Line shortcut or Create Line. We can use the L key as well under the Create menu. So with that active, if I hold my cursor still, it says Place First Point. And if I highlight on the line, you'll notice a little cross pops up. So that means I'm constraining to another curve. So that means instead of having to, create a line like this, and then I'm going to go Escape to complete this. Now these points are just 2 points floating in space. I can move them wherever I like. I can then go Constrain to there. So that point now is constrained to this curve. So I'm still in constraint mode, so I'll hit Escape. What that means is I can move that anywhere, and so long as it's on that curve, it will draw and adapt to where I drag it. And the same applies to the top. So I can go Constrain to that. So now I'm constraining to, I'll hit Escape again. So you'll see my constraints are rendered. If I select the point is constrained to here. And then if I select the line, the top and the bottom point are constrained to here. I can remove them by selecting that and deleting it, or I can just move this around and put it wherever I like. So because those two constraints are valid, it'll update in a kind of a strange way. So I can also do things like go, I want this to be a vertical line. So there's horizontal, vertical here. All the constraints are represented here in a menu as well as shortcuts. I'm going to go horizontal. So that's added this constraint. So now there's 3 constraints describing this line. It has to be constrained top and bottom, and it has to be vertical. So then I could do something like go, okay, I want to make, hit D there. So that's the same as this, D. Now I can tell it, oh, I want this line to be 10 inches tall. And you'll see now it's got 3 constraints on it. So it has to be vertical, has to be constrained at the top, has to be constrained at the bottom, and has to be 10 inches. So now it's no longer a blue line, it can only be there. It actually could be over here, but we'd have to reconstruct it to get it over there. Now we can also do things like, I'm going to delete that length. So now you see it goes back to blue. Now I'll do D for dimension again. So I've selected the line. It's going to assume I'm measuring the length, but I could actually then select something else. Now you'll notice it's measuring the distance to that center. So I could tell it I want it to be 3 inches from the center. That's now fully constrained. So because my circle's constrained at the center, top, bottom, vertical, there's no other way that can resolve. So that's the basic idea of that. I'm actually going to, I want this line to not be constrained to the bottom. What I want is to move this point and constrain it to the center. So I'm going to go Constrain to Center. So now, once again, that is a fully defined shape, fully defined line. And now we're going to start to use this to construct our compass. So let's see here. I'm going to go Create Circular Pattern. So this, ordinarily, we sort of shy away from patterns and things for a while. But for medallions, it's just such a fundamental concept. We're going to get right into it. So it's taking a defined line, and then it's going to rotate it around here and duplicate. So I'm going to choose the center point. It defaults to 3, and we want 8. So now we have lines all the way around. We go OK. It's a little confusing in that we have this line, but you can see there's 8 lines. And what's also cropped up here, which is actually quite interesting, is this pattern info. So we created 8 new elements that rotated around this center point when we did that pattern. If I double click the pattern icon there, I can adapt that. So I could go, oh no, I want 7, 6, 5. We'll put it back to 8. Just keep in mind, inside your sketch, all of these little icons, so you can see here, it's actually can get kind of frustrating. The constrain to center icon is sort of almost overlapping with the pattern icons. You just have to move a couple of pixels to get exactly the one you want. So you can go in and edit that. Notice we still only have one element in our history. So whole sketches are treated as single history elements. That's good to keep in mind. So it's a good idea to often keep your sketches as simple as possible, just because they only present as one thing in your time history. So now we're going to get into just more of what we've just seen. I'm going to make the outside one a construction line. So what's changed here is this has gone from being a full geometry creating line to a construction line. So we can toggle back and forward between this. So the dotted line is a construction line. And what's different there is we now create what are called profiles. The diameter thing doesn't contribute to profiles, but all geometry that intersects and creates closed shapes contributes to profiles. So what's really cool about this is these closed shapes get really powerful with Origin, because that's exactly what Origin uses as well. We want to create often closed vector shapes to create our geometry that Origin cuts. When a shape's closed like this, we can cut a pocket, we can cut on the outside of the line, we can cut on the inside of the line. Everything there is closed and complete in a way that Origin understands. So if we go and turn this into a construction line, you'll notice it no longer contributes. So there's no more, I can't select these areas because they're not closed shapes. It treats the construction line as an open shape. So as we start adding more lines to this, we'll be creating closed shapes with the goal of creating geometry from them that we'll send to Origin for cutting. So now we're going to create the little vertical elements. I'll actually zip back to our demo. At the moment, we just have the big main lines here. We're going to start to create these lines and get them all constrained and ready to go. So we're going to start at the center and work our way out. And then we're going to add little radius details here, here, here. We're not going to spend a lot of time doing each and every one of these. We're just going to do the unique ones at the top and then duplicate them using that same rotational pattern technique. Let's create a line. Because we've made this diameter 16, we know we can snap to that top point. You'll see it turned into a little square. And then we can either enter data for the length, or I can just snap to another point like this. And now I have a line. I'm going to hit escape, otherwise I'm still in the line creation mode. And you'll see it's constrained at the top and it's constrained at the bottom. So I can move this. The reason I can move it is because this one's blue, it's not fully defined. But we know that that is the way we describe where this is we're going to draw an arc between these two. So if I hit the D button, which is the same as going create dimension, I'm going to click on this element and create a dimension. So that one is 6 degrees. Now you'll notice it's gone black. It's fully described. I'm hitting escape again to get out of the dimension mode. And now this shape, I've started to create my actual geometry that I want to create for my final export. So I'm going to just do its mirror. We could mirror it. So L, and then dimension, enter. I can actually, this is fun. Rather than hand entering 6 again, I can click on another dimension. So it's saying dimension 9, which is that one, and then hit enter. So it comes up with a little FX. I'm going to go escape, move that down, which means it's inheriting from that. So if I change this, 12, you'll see that both of them update. So I'll put it back to 6, and it updates. We are good to go. We've got the little ones that come out here. I'm actually going to build another with the line button. From now on, I'll just hit L instead of clicking that icon up there. And then you can see I highlight the point, that intersection point, and it constrains it to that. And then you'll see as I move around, I'm getting a lot of info here. So below me, you see those 2 double dashes? That's a parallel constraint. So that's telling me if I was to click here, I would be constrained parallel to that line below me. As I start moving down, I've got the arc angle between those 2 points. Now I'm constraining it to this line. You'll notice a little 90-degree angle popped up there. So I could constrain it to that other line at 90 degrees. So just be mindful, and there's another 90 degree to the 6-degree arc up here, and it can also be collinear to itself. Often, if you have a particular line that you're interested in, so if I hover over this and then move here, you'll notice it will prioritize that line. So whatever line you've kind of highlighted most recently, it will try and do a constraint that relates to it. You can see I'm parallel to that line down there. So for this one, I'm just going to get this one up and running. So now we've got 3 of those, they're called profiles, areas that we can create geometry from, solid geometry, and export data from, should we want. Now we'll do the secondary little points. So we'll do these guys. They're 3 inches out and 8 degrees from the center. So 3 inches from that point to the tip, and then 8 degrees on either side. So I'll go L, and then I can put this anywhere. Oh, you'll notice this one's a good one. This is that triangle, means it's in the center of this line. So if ever you see that, you're snapping to the center of a line. That one gets pretty handy. But because I'm going to use constraints to define this, I'm just going to put this in casually wherever I like. And then I'm still in the draw mode. I'm snapping to that point. See how it becomes a square? And then just bring it down, snap to this line. That little dash tells me that that's aligned to that. So then I can go D for dimension. I don't want to describe the length. I want to describe that arc. And we said that was 8. And we'll do the same on this side. I'm still in the dimension mode. And if I click on the outside, notice I'm describing a different arc. So a lot of these things are based on where you're clicking. So just be mindful of what Fusion is trying to tell you as you click. Move around and look for a spot that's constraining to the right elements or measuring the right arc. So I click here, and then I'm going to click on the 8, so dimension 11. So now those two, this one is a driven dimension driven by that. So that's close. You'll see they're blue though, so we haven't fully defined it. So let's do that now. So to define it fully, we go there. Now this is interesting as well. So I can define my dimension to be vertical, to be, I guess you'd call it the hypotenuse or whatever, the total length, or horizontal. Just keep in mind, once again, move around and Fusion will tell you what it's trying to do. So if I click here, I get 3 inches, and that's now, these are the unique elements, 1, 2, 3, 4. We got one little star in the middle, so I'll do that as well. So this little star, where 1.181 is the length from the center, and it's 16 degrees. Let's just arbitrarily click there, arbitrarily click on the line we know we want. So now we get escape. If I select this, we know our constraints are correct. Now it's a matter of entering our dimensions. So I've actually started with the line selected. So I'm going to hit escape. What I actually want to measure is the point to the center. So D, and then select the center. Come over here, 1.181. Still blue. We've got some more to describe here. So I'm going to select that, and tell it it's 16 degrees. Complete it with this. Now I can actually, if you see, if I come over here, it's going to dot a line. So I can be constrained to that, just matching that. But if things change, this is not constrained to that. It just matched that. So I'm going to actually do the same as we've been doing and dimension the angle and then select the angle it's the same as. We could do stuff with mirrors. We'll keep it as simple as possible for now though. Right, so I now have enough geometry to get this process underway. So let's leave the sketch. You'll notice we've gone back to solid mode and our sketch has been, all the dimensions are no longer visible. Should you want to see them, they get pretty cluttered once you get a bunch of sketches going. You can right-click on the sketch and then go Show Dimensions. So even though I'm not actively editing this sketch, these dimensions are visible. I'm going to hide those and zoom out. I'm also going to hold down, this is another navigation tip. On Windows, Shift and middle, like the scroll wheel, lets you orbit. It's the same as grabbing the View Cube or the Orbit button down here. So there's several options for all of these. I like to use the shortcuts in the mouse. You use whatever works for you. So we now have this profile and this profile. I'm going to extrude this. So I can click the E button, or I click this button up here, or find it in the menu, Extrude. We'll use the menu option. You notice this is highlighted, and our settings for Extrude have highlighted. If I hold my cursor still, it says select sketch profiles or planar faces to extrude. So I can either, I can add more or select them again to remove them. So it's pretty quick to get up and running, and you'll see here every time I add one or remove one, this is just left clicking, this number goes up or down. So just double check you've got the right number of things active here, and we should be good. Now, one other little tip that's kind of cool, if you're working on a sketch, it's tempting to do a positive extrude, but then if you're doing more work using that sketch to extrude items, the bodies or the geometry you create, we'll do it positive just to show you, 0.25 inches. So I'm extruding up towards me above the sketch, but they're going to occlude the sketch. I won't be able to see the sketch once I accept this. Well, there's more to it than that. When you create geometry from a sketch, you might see it like this. Everything looks fine, but your sketch vanishes. So if I turn the sketch back on, I can see it. Now, the problem here is I can't really interact with my sketch properly anymore. I'm selecting you'll see there, I'm selecting the geometry. So what's cool here is we have created the extrude positive, so it's above the surface, but it's created a history feature here, which is the extrude feature. So if I right-click on that and go Edit Feature, you'll notice all of my settings are still available. So I can go back. One thing to keep in mind, if I hold down Control, on Windows anyway, the feature vanishes and I can select more elements. We don't actually want to do this, but just see that's an option. So Control lets you add and remove in the feature menu. Now, I'm going to want to make this negative, so we're going to go negative 0.25. So this is kind of handy in that now the sketch is on the top and everything's below it, kind of like what we're actually creating on the floor. So just keep that in mind as an option. So these are all the settings. We can have an offset plane. I could do this below the surface, so 0.2, negative 0.2. So there's a lot of different options here for how we create our offset. We actually want to do it using that 0, 0 plane as our reference. So I just encourage you to get in here and experiment, especially given, we're creating features here that can be edited later. So there's no harm in experimenting. You can always go back to what you were doing. We won't get into the weeds here. We're just defining a distance we want to extrude. Negative is down, and we can taper it, if you want a draft angle or something. So 2 degrees, you'll see that. Update, it's getting wider. Negative 2 will get smaller. We'll do negative 20 to exaggerate it. We want 100% vertical lines, no taper here. And then what's interesting, we'll find in future, keep an eye on this, new body is what will happen if this is all updating live. So if I had geometry that existed here, I could either be joining to it, cutting into it, intersecting it, or a new body. If you're going to use these elements later, chances are you're going to want new body. But just keep in mind that Fusion's going to try to select one of these for you based on what it thinks you're doing. But once again, if you get it wrong, you can just right-click here, come back and change it. So we'll do a new body, create this geometry. Now, we need to rotate that around the center. So actually, we'll just look here. So this is new body. So it's now called SSS. It could be called anything we want. It's going to get consumed when we create a pattern here. So we'll do that first. So create pattern, circular pattern. So this is just a quarter of our little center star. What axis do we want to use? This has actually temporarily made our origin visible. So I want to rotate it around this center blue line. It defaults to 3, put that to 4, Now we have a complete element. We could disable one of them or enable it, but that's the idea of pattern. I'm just going to hide the sketch for a second so that it's clear. So what we got here is it adds 1, 2, 3 to it. So we've got 4 elements here. We want that to be one solid piece of geometry. So you can see here each piece, I'm selecting faces, is a separate element. So we don't want to cut those separately. You may do. You can definitely export them separately and handle them how you want. But for this demonstration, we're going to combine them. So we're going to go Modify, Combine. So this is similar to that Extrude option where we had the option of cutting or joining. Now, it's going to take these 4 elements. 1 is the target body, and then 3 are the tool bodies. So they could be, once again, joining, cutting, or intersecting. We're going to combine them all into one, and we're not going to keep all the spare components. Like if you were to cut a hole in this, you could tell it to get rid of the item that was cutting the hole, and that's the default. Or with this keep tools on, we could keep them around. In this case, we want one piece of geometry that takes all of these and joins them together. So we'll do that now. Okay, and we'll call this center star. The reason I'm naming this here is for ease of finding things later. Also, when we export them to Origin, this will help a lot. I'd encourage you to do that. Even we'll do this now to the sketch. Initial geometry. That means, once we get, 6 sketches or something here, we can keep track of what we're doing here. Right, now back to creating our geometry. That one's all good. Now we're going to start to make individual elements here. So I want to turn my sketches back on. We are first, while we can see in here clearly, we're going to fillet these edges. You can see these corners are rounded. There's a few key corners we're going to want to round. So if I select an edge, you'll notice I can select faces, I can select the whole body, or I can select individual edges. You'll notice here I get a readout of the length, or I can select points. So I get a readout of its position. So I'm going to take that edge and I'm going to go Modify, Fillet. So this now lets me round that. I'm going to do 0.08 inches. So the idea here is it's approximately the radius of the cutter you intend to cut with, plus a little buffer for if you're doing offsets and things. So if I'm going to use an 1/8 inch cutter, that would be 0.0625 plus a little bit. For the offset, we'll just do 0.08. And that lets me visualize that. Now, let's say I want to do it to these other corners. I'll turn the sketch off momentarily. I can turn off all sketches or a particular sketch. So just keep that in mind. I can turn off all bodies or just one body. In this case, it's going to look the same because we only have one of each. But down here, if I go Edit Feature, so now we can use that same technique we were talking about. I can hold down Control and highlight the other edges. So you'll see here it's saying 2 edges, and it keeps my radius I have entered. What's kind of cool about this is I don't need to orbit around. I can kind of project through the geometry and select these other edges as well. So with that accepted, I've got 4 edges, and I hit OK. We're good to go there. So I'm going to turn my sketch back on. So that means this is exactly the geometry that can be cut when we're pocketing on the inside. So we're just going to keep an eye on that as we go so that each element gets the correct radius. So these points here are examples of areas that the pocket is going to need to have radiused by that same radius. So I'm going to go into the sketch now and double click it. And you'll see here it jumps to sketch mode. And I'm going to put an arc that bridges these 2 profiles. So it's easier to do it here rather than on the solid geometry. We just did one fillet on the solid geometry. We can also do it inside the sketch itself. So if I make an arc and make it a center arc, I can click kind of anywhere here. We're going to actually dial it in using constraints, and then click there, and then click there. I've now constrained this. We'll show you the constraints to both edges. So constraint, constraint, and this is constrained. We don't have a diameter of this element, so it can kind of float around and do weird things. So I actually want to give it a diameter, so I can do that with the D. In this case, it's a radius because it's not a complete circle. And that's good. We don't have to do any math. We can go 0.08. And now I'm going to want to constrain this. I don't just want the tip, the point constrained to this edge. I actually want it to be tangent to the edge. So I'll show you what that means by drawing a circle out here. So if I click that and then I go, I want to make this circle tangent to this, it means it touches that edge at one point. By doing that, because this is a symmetrical object, I only need to do one side, but that guarantees me I've got the radius and it touches that at one point. It doesn't intersect it at some strange point along the arc. So that's that corner defined. We'll do the same thing here. It can take a little getting used to these arcs. So create arc, 3-point arc. So you start with the center point. If you just hover still, it's going to tell you what it's looking for. So center point, another point, another point. Select the curve itself, select radius, 0.08. I could find the arc to do that, to reference, but we'll just enter it here. And then I will do the tangent here. And this, we have to keep a close eye on this. I do want, see if I select here, it continues through. Because there's a gap here, my profile continues beyond that. Whereas this one, it comes to a point there. So I need to actually constrain this to this. So that's the point constrained to this edge. So that just makes sure that my arc comes around, and now we can confirm we have separate closed shapes. So we'll do the same on this side just to double check. Pretty sure I set that up right. Yep. So now we know all of these shapes, 1, 2, 3, 4, have the radiuses they need at this end, and then the star in the center has it. We're going to have to bake it into this as well. So first, I'm going to extrude these. So worth noting, if I was to extrude this like this, I would be creating one piece of geometry. I'll do it just to show you what I mean. So I've got two elements selected. I'm going to do it negative 0.25 inches. If I zoom around, I'll see that. It's choosing new body, so that's all good. Now, what's happened here is I've got center star, so that's all as we made it. Now I've got this new body, but each piece of that didn't make a separate body. It all came in as one. So I'm going to go back here and find the element that produced this. I'm going to right click on it and go edit feature, and I'm going to remove this one and then go OK. So now I've got one piece. That's fine. I can actually make that do a little more work. So I can go edit feature and select this one. So this will create two pieces of geometry. Because they don't intersect, we get that and that. And then I'll have to do two more extrudes. I can hit this button or hit the E button and then leave everything default, negative 0.25 inches. Notice it's telling me it's trying to cut. So what's it trying to cut? It doesn't look like it collides with anything. Let's zoom in here and see. Because we put that fillet there, it would actually be coming in here, and you can see it would be cutting that area out. So we don't want to do that. We want to do the opposite. We're going to eventually get this curve to cut away this corner so that our pockets match. So we're going to create a new body. So that means there's just two bodies that happen to intersect there. So now we have one more shape. Extrude, negative 0.25 inches. Let's leave it in a new body, and that means all those pieces remain independent. They don't get bundled together. Right, so this is all the core geometry. We're now going to hide the sketch because it's not as helpful anymore. And we're going to start to do some, we're going to cut away these corners using combine again, and we're going to get this center star to cut away that sharp point so that they all mate together perfectly. So for this one, we're going to go modify, combine. So target body, tool body, star. At the moment it's trying to combine them. We're going to cut. So you'll see, it's kind of cool. It previews it, and when you're in cut mode, the red element shows you what geometry is being removed. Now, I have the option of throwing away the star, or I can keep it. So the tool body is the star, the red thing, and we're going to want to do it on this element too and use it elsewhere. So we'll keep it around. So that now perfectly mates with this, and this one needs the same treatment. Notice if I select a face here, I don't have the whole body selected, just the top face. I can select it here, but you'll notice if I have a sub-element selected, I get this little dash underneath it. So if you ever need to identify, I haven't named these yet, we'll do that in a second, but if I need to identify which one is which, just look for that blue line. Okay, so we'll do that again. So I've got the top surface selected, and then I go modify, I can select the whole thing, sorry, and then go modify combine down here, or this. Select the geometry I want to cut it with. My settings remain in this case, so I'm keeping the tool body, which is this, and I'm cutting that. Hit OK. Now things get fun. We can make it look cool. So we're going to start by naming these. So I'm going to make this dark. So small, dark. And by dark I mean, I'll show you what I mean. If I hit A, this brings up the appearance menu. So with this, we've got a bunch of materials here. We've got like a standard one already there. But if we scroll down, there's wood solid. This is really handy for this type of work. So we can actually, you'll remember the examples from here. These are all previewed just using exactly this technique. So we can predetermine what direction we want grain to go. We can see it, see the different materials, see the end grain. This is actually really powerful for getting a feel for what you've produced and just confirming you have exactly what you want before sending it to Origin. Now I can go for a finished solid wood. So the solid ones are particularly useful. Now there's two different types here. I've got 3D ash. You'll notice it doesn't have any icon to the side of it. And these other ones have icons to the side of it. So say I wanted to grab some koa, I have to first download it. That's all that icon's saying, like it's not currently local. So I'll just click and drag that as an example onto my center geometry. You notice the whole thing highlights. We can either drag and drop it here, or we can drag and drop it here. Now what it's going to do is it's going to find the longest length and align the grain that way. So what's kind of cool here, it's a pretty reasonable representation of it. So you can see the little pores of the end grain, and you can see the length of regular grain. We can also right-click on it. I got to close this menu to do this for some reason, and then bring up texture map controls. So this shows me its standard alignment, and then we can mess with that just by dragging these handles. You notice they update. So you can do whatever you want there, and it will respond accordingly. So this is a really cool way of quickly getting a feel for what it is you're creating here. Using the materials, pretty representative of the materials you'll use. A again, bringing up and you'll notice these are the materials used in this design. So I'm going to go back to the top of this list, grab some ash, put it on this one. Oh, sorry, that's the dark one. So I named that small dark. So I'll put that on that one and that one, and then put some mahogany on the two ones we want dark. So you can see there the grain has automatically selected the longest length. So usually that's a pretty good starting place. Close that. So now I've got my dark and light elements. I've got sort of a center koa for some reason, and I'm just going to confirm I've got these named right. So small dark. So this one's large light. And then if I double click on these slowly, I get to edit them. So then body 7, that'll be large, dark, and then small light. It's a good idea to name them prior to duplicating them and stuff, just because it avoids the need to name all the duplicates, because they're going to come in with small dark 1, 2, 3, 4 as we duplicate them. So let's do that. I'm going to hide the center and then select all of this. If I hold down Control, I can toggle on and off that center, the selection. Now I'm going to pattern these. So create a radial pattern, circular pattern. And I'm going to choose an axis that goes around the blue one here. It's going to default to 3, so that looks a bit odd at the moment. Bump that up to 4. Now we're talking. That's what we're looking for. You'll notice the direction of the grain has updated. So we could go through and adjust all that. So I could right-click on this and go Texture Map Controls. You'll notice it's kind of inherited from this object. So yeah, a little bit odd there. And go OK. Or you could go through and do that all by hand if you wanted to see that represented. Now we are basically ready to export these elements. One little pre-flight check that's worth considering. I'm going to turn the center back on and select everything. So I'm in solid modeling mode. There's some really handy inspect things here. I'd encourage you to dig in here and have a look. I can do things like interference checking. So with all of this geometry selected, I can compute any interferences. So there are none. That's what we're looking for. I'm going to cancel that and actually produce a problem. So I'm just going to move this center point. So just move copy and then move it in X by 0.3. So this will be pretty exaggerated. I'm once again going to select everything. Click and drag everything. Control A is a common shortcut for that. And then I'm going to do the same interference check. Now with everything selected, compute. Okay, something's up. Now that's really cool. So I can quickly assess what is colliding with what, and I can highlight individually. So it's telling me the area of the intersection, and it's telling me the two objects that are colliding. This is a great way to go through and quickly understand where you've got problems. So it's one of those things that only like a full-on 3D CAD app can assess this type of detail. So that's one of the areas that Fusion gets really helpful. Now the other cool thing is here, we see now we've accumulated quite a lot of history. So all the different features that we've created, all the different elements we combined, the patterns, this move. So I can double click it and manipulate it, or I can right click on it and delete it. That puts it back where it belongs. One quick note, Fusion's actually very good at saving things in case it crashes or anything. So I'm going to save this as compass test save. Now it's going to come up here, compass test version 0. So Fusion's also really cool in terms of saving versions. I no longer need to think about renaming or anything on this. So it's gone from 0 to 1. So if I make a change now, let's see here, I will hide this. So if I make it just that change and then save again, this is no longer talking about any naming of the file. This is just a note to yourself, a description. So hidden part. Now keep an eye on here, we're on V1. So this is going to update to V2. It takes just a little second. The cool thing is you don't have to think about versions at all. So don't add versions yourself, just keep hitting save and it will add its own versions. Now with this top surface saved, I've got large light, one face. So it's the face I intend to cut from. So Origin will be resting on that element when I cut it. If I go Tools and then Origin Export, ordinarily you would see it in this state. So that's actually, we export one element at a time and it's looking for bodies. So you'll see here, select the entity to export. So if I select this, it's telling us it's going to convert that, it's going to color code it appropriately, save it as a correctly scaled SVG ready for cutting with Origin. The advanced options would be single solid body, a solid body layout, which would be if I wanted to export all of these. To do that, you'd want to move these around, turn them into components, move them, and nest them in a way that the cutter can get around them. But that is an option. And then if you ever get squeezed or there's some interesting geometry in a sketch or something you want to export, I could literally bring this whole sketch out and start messing with it in Illustrator by selecting the sketch. So I'm going to revert to single solid body, which is the default non-advanced mode, hide this, and then just go through and select this. So it's telling me I've got large light selected. If I go OK, now I'm exporting. You'll notice it's named it automatically. It's going into the last folder I was saving in, and it's named it the name of the body. So this is why naming your objects is helpful. So I've just exported that element ready for cutting with Origin. I'll do the large, dark. You notice it's named appropriately. That's the large light one I just exported. And it exports that quickly in the background. Very simple, very straightforward. So keep in mind, to select these shapes, it needs to make sense to Origin. And by that I mean the geometry has to be cuttable as though it was a plane. If I selected this, we're going to get some weird outcomes in that this face is going to be available, and then the total geometry will come out. But it doesn't make sense to cut this element from this angle. We're going to want to select it from the top, like that. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed we have yet to create the overall shape, the pocket. Let's do that now. So I'm going to select all of this, go back to solid, and then move and copy. I'm going to move it up in Z by 1 inch and create a copy. So now it's duplicated all those elements here. You'll see down here it's told me it's made a copy. So that's good. And I was selecting bodies. So that's good. Now we're going to just look at it from the side. It doesn't matter that I've moved away from that original geometry, because this will be cut separately in your floor. I now select all of those elements and then go combine. It's defaulting to cut and keep tools. I don't want to keep the tools, but I do want to join it. So this now creates one big shape we're going to use for the pocket. At the moment, it's going to export as a positive element. So by that I mean it will be cut and coded as a black fill, and then when you bring it into Origin, you'll be cutting the outside of the line. So if you don't want to touch Illustrator or anything like that, you can bring it in and change the cut type on tool. So you would change it to a pocket, clear out the center, and then do an inside cut to get the final dimension using that 1/8 inch cutter we defined. So I'd say that's the best option. You can also create geometry here in Fusion, and then we could use these shapes to cut a hole in it. So I'll show you the positive way. So if I go export that, and if I just, you notice I haven't named that. I should name it, but I'm just going to name it on the export. Pocket. Okay. I'm actually going to name this pocket as well, so that subsequent exports get the same outcome. Now, I'm going to create a new sketch to show you if I wanted to explicitly create a pocket using Fusion. So I could go create sketch, select my same XY plane, create a rectangle, and I'm going to use the center point rectangle so that I know the center of it is going to align to the center of this geometry, so I can place it with Origin using the center point. I'm going to select 18 inches in that axis and 18 in that axis. Now we have a shape that is symmetrical and centered and fully defined. I'm then going to select the whole thing. Because there's only a rectangle and these lines here are construction geometry, that whole profile gets selected. If I was doing this rectangle in this sketch, all these other pieces of geometry would need to be selected as well. So that's why I'm creating a new sketch to avoid the clutter. Now if I go extrude and select that plane, go negative, I'll make it a larger piece of geometry. It's going to tell me that they're not visible. When I create a body, because my whole bodies folder is hidden, these won't be visible. So that's just a warning. If I turn my bodies folder back on, now we see all this geometry. But it's colliding. So I'll call this floor pocket. And I'm going to combine this with all this other geometry. So this is achieving the same as we did exporting that positive pocket, but assuming we didn't want to go through the process of making that positive pocket. So this is just an alternative approach. Combine, and then the tools are these. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to go cut, and you'll notice they all start highlighting. I'm going to view it from the top so it's easier to select. They all start turning red as I select them. There's more sophisticated ways to handle selections, but for this simple intro, we won't get into it. So I do want to keep the tools because they are the positive elements, and that is enough to cut my hole. So once that processes, now you'll see there's not that weird intersection, and when I highlight that area, this all matches. So just to make it clear, I'm going to move this down -3 inches, and you'll see what we're talking about there, and hide the origin. So if I select this, I will get an export with this pocket. I'll also get the outline. Like it will have a square available for me to cut the perimeter, but on Origin we would not want to cut that. We just want to cut this pocket. If ever you find the geometry that you bring into Origin doesn't enable you to cut exactly what you want, chances are in either, say, Affinity Design or Illustrator or something, you can manipulate these vectors and get exactly what you want. We'll just export this, and that's going to be called Floor Pocket. Go Save. So that then rolls into the process of actually cutting the positives and then the pocket in the floor. But that wraps up what we need to do for exporting the geometry from Fusion, creating and exporting that. So I hope that helps you understand the process. It's actually pretty straightforward, or you'll find, once you get confident navigating this data, you'll find that Fusion is really helpful in terms of the way it handles constraints and the way you can go back and manipulate things later. For instance, we'll see if we can blow it up just out of interest. If I was to say this was 22 inches, you'll notice this entire thing automatically updates. And we're obviously cutting beyond the edge of this. We'd need this to be larger, but you'll see how flexible this whole process is in that you can go back and make those kind of sweeping changes and have everything propagate through your design. So that's Fusion. We'll put this back to the correct one. And we will save this file. Complete. That's my introduction to creating inlays, medallions with Fusion.